Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. Today we're tackling something, well, a little bit sticky, something a little bit controversial. It's this whole Taiwan independence label that's been floating around. You ever get the feeling like someone's trying to stick you with a label that just doesn't fit? Like, you know, trying to squeeze into those shoes that are just like way too small?
Yeah, it's more than just a little uncomfortable, right? It's almost like these labels, they have this power to shape how people see you, put you in a box.
Right. And that's what we're going to dig into today. We're going to be diving into this whole Taiwan independence label. We've got a ton of articles, analyses, all about how the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is using this label. And let me tell you, it's not as simple as it sounds.
It's like trying to, paint this incredibly complex picture with like just one color, oversimplifying this whole situation that's full of nuances and different perspectives.
Okay, so today what we're going to try to do is unpack this whole labeling tactic. How is the CCP using it? Why is it so effective? And what does it mean for Taiwan? I mean, for Taiwan on this big global stage, right? We're also going to be looking at how this label, how it actually stacks up against the reality of Taiwan's democracy. Because let's be honest, it's a pretty vibrant democracy. So basically, consider this a behind-the-scenes look at how language can be used as a political tool.
You know what's really fascinating to me about this? It's how the CCP is managing to use this label, this Taiwan independence label, on like multiple levels, right? It's like a domestic strategy, but it's also this international pressure tactic all in one.
So let's break this down a little bit. How are they using this label? Like, give us the inside scoop.
Well, domestically, they're basically using it to silence any opposition. So anyone who disagrees with the CCP's rule over Taiwan, they're instantly labeled as this dangerous separatist, a threat to national unity.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're saying, don't even think about it. Like this is the way it is, and there's no room for any other perspective.
Exactly. And then internationally, they use this label to isolate Taiwan diplomatically. It's almost like they're telling other countries, listen, if you support Taiwan, you're supporting separatism, which basically makes you an enemy of China.
So they're putting other countries in this like impossible position where they have to choose. They have to choose between, their relationship with China and their support for Taiwan. Talk about a power play, right?
Absolutely. And it's effective, right? Because a lot of countries are really economically dependent on China. They don't want to risk, losing access to this massive market. So they end up playing it safe and avoiding anything that could be even remotely seen as endorsing Taiwan independence.
The thing is, though, is Taiwan, despite this whole label, is a thriving democracy.
Yeah.
Like the Economist Democracy Index, they actually rank Taiwan as a full democracy, whereas China, well, they fall into that authoritarian regime category.
It's a pretty stark contrast, right? And it really highlights just how absurd the CCP's claims actually are. I mean, Taiwan has free and fair elections, freedom of speech, a free press, all the things you'd expect to see in a real functioning democracy.
It's like someone calling you, I don't know, a cat when you're clearly a dog. It doesn't make sense. And it's not just about, these abstract ideas of freedom. We're talking about real world consequences. Remember back in 2019 when those protests erupted in Hong Kong?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually directly relevant here. I mean, the CCP, they labeled those pro-democracy protesters as separatists, just like they're doing in Taiwan. It was a way to kind of discredit their entire movement and then justify a crackdown.
And guess what happened? A lot of those Hong Kongers, those who were looking for a place where they could actually like exercise their freedoms, they ended up fleeing to, well, Taiwan. They saw it as the safe haven, a place where they knew their rights would actually be respected.
It's a really powerful testament to the reality of Taiwan's democracy. It shows how much appeal it actually holds for people who are yearning for freedom.
So you have this label being used to demonize and isolate Taiwan, and then you have like the reality of Taiwan's democracy. So how do these two things coexist? How does Taiwan function on the global stage with this label hanging over its head? And that's where this whole one China principle comes in.
Right, exactly. The one China principle, it's rooted in this 1971 UN resolution that recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole legitimate representative of China. And this is where things get, well, a little bit sticky for Taiwan.
Because if there's only one China, and that China is the PRC, then where does that leave Taiwan?
Exactly. That's the whole point. The CCP, they use this principle to limit Taiwan's its international space. So many countries, they fear, diplomatic or economic repercussions from China. They don't want to recognize Taiwan's independence. They don't want to cross that one China line.
So Taiwan's in this crazy difficult position where it's functioning as a sovereign nation, a thriving democracy, but its official statehood is constantly being challenged because of this one China framework.
It really is, and it forces us to kind of ask these tough questions. What does independence even mean in this context? Can a country actually be independent in practice, even if it's not formally recognized? How much power does a label really have?
Those are great questions, and that's what we're going to be digging into as we keep going in this deep dive. We'll be looking at the historical connections between Taiwan and mainland China. We're going to look at how Taiwan's navigating this crazy, complicated geopolitical landscape. And we're going to think about what all of this means for the future of Taiwan and its people. So stick around, folks, because this is going to be, it's going to be pretty wild. All right, so we've been talking about this Taiwan independence label, how it's being used, almost as a political weapon. And we talked about the difference between Taiwan's system and China's system. But to really get this whole issue, I think we got to rewind a little bit. We got to go back into the history books, right? And I know our source material mentioned some pretty interesting stuff about Taiwan's past and how it connects to mainland China.
Yeah, it's definitely complex. The ties between Taiwan and mainland China, they go way back, centuries. I mean, the source even mentions connections back to the Ming Dynasty, and then with the Koxinga coming in the 17th century, and then later the Qing Dynasty ruling Taiwan. So yeah, there's history there. It's not a simple story, that's for sure.
Right. It's not like a rom-com. It's not black and white. History is messy, right? But how does all this, this shared history, how does it play into what's happening now? Is the CCP just using it to, justify their claim over Taiwan?
I mean, it's definitely part of it, right? They're pushing this narrative that really emphasizes the shared past, those connections to, fuel this sense of national unity and make their claim seem, legitimate. It's like they're saying, look, we've been together for ages, so this whole Taiwan independence thing is just this blip, this temporary thing.
So it's all about how they frame the narrative, right?
Yeah.
But is that really the whole story, though? Even if there are these shared roots, hasn't Taiwan also developed its own identity, its own political system? I mean, they haven't just been, sitting around.
No, absolutely not. Taiwan's history, it's not just about mainland China. It's been shaped by so many things, right?
Yeah.
Indigenous cultures, colonial influences, and then, of course, its own path toward becoming a democracy.
So it's about acknowledging those historical connections, sure, but also recognizing that Taiwan has its own story to tell, its own unique narrative.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. How do they reconcile that shared history with their own aspirations?
It's a delicate balance, right? Acknowledging the cultural links, the historical links with mainland China, but at the same time emphasizing their own distinct identity and their commitment to democracy.
Yeah.
They're kind of saying, yeah, we have a shared past, but we also have our own present and future. Yeah, it's like when you realize, hold on, I'm not just a mini version of my parents, I'm my own person.
Yeah.
You have your own dreams, your own goals. But Taiwan's doing this with the CCP, right there.
It's this constant I guess you could say push and pull, a struggle for control of the narrative.
Yeah.
The CCP wants to frame it in a way that benefits them, right? And Taiwan's fighting to assert its own identity.
And don't forget that Taiwan independence label. That's a major tool in this battle for narrative.
Totally. It's like they're saying, you can't even talk about Taiwan's future without being called a separatist. It's about silencing dissent.
But the reality is that Taiwan is a democracy, a place where people can, express their opinions and shape their own destiny. It's not like a blank page for the CCP.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that Taiwan's people have the right to determine their own future. It's their story. No one has the right to dictate how that story unfolds.
So we've got this historical, I guess you could say, baggage, right? We've got this struggle for narrative, this label being used to shut down conversation. What kind of challenges does Taiwan face when trying to assert its identity, its autonomy on the global stage? I mean, how do you navigate that?
Well, one of the biggest challenges, like we touched on earlier, is that one China policy, right? Because it limits their ability to be recognized by other countries officially. It's like they're hitting this invisible wall.
It's like they're trapped in this web of diplomacy, right? where their voice is like constantly being muted, kind of a David and Goliath situation.
It really is. It's a struggle to just be heard, to be seen as legitimate. And the CCP knows that. And they use it. They pressure countries to avoid doing anything that, even looks like support for Taiwan independence.
But even with all that, I mean, Taiwan has been pretty resilient. I mean, they're resourceful. They haven't given up.
Absolutely. They've been building relationships with countries that share their values, promoting their democracy, showing off what they're good at economically, technologically.
It's like they're finding ways to break out of this closed loop, this narrative that says Taiwan is just part of China, end of story. But what about on a personal level? How does this label, this Taiwan independence label, affect people living in Taiwan, like every day?
For a lot of people, it creates this sense of uncertainty, this fear. They're worried about, speaking out against the CCP, even expressing their own views on Taiwanese identity.
So it's not just political. It's like it gets into daily life. It creates this anxiety, like self-censorship almost.
It's a powerful way to put it. It's this psychological pressure. But at the same time, there's also this amazing resilience, this determination. They're not giving up on their values, on their right to decide their own future.
It's inspiring. Honestly, it's like they're saying, we're not going to let fear run things. We're going to keep speaking out. We're going to keep advocating for our rights, and we're going to build our own future.
I agree. It's really a testament to human spirit, to the pursuit of freedom, this refusal to be, silenced or defined by labels.
Well said. I think it's time for us to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be exploring what might happen in the future for Taiwan and what it all means for the world, really. So stay tuned, because the story is far from over. All right, so we're back. And I got to ask the big question, right? What's next for Taiwan? I mean, we've talked about the challenges, we talked about the history of the CCP, but where does all of this lead? What's in the future?
If only I had a crystal ball for it. Predicting the future is, let's just say it's not easy, especially with something this complicated. But what we can do is, I guess, look for trends, analyze, see what's happening, and maybe come up with some potential scenarios.
Okay, I like that. Potential scenarios. Lay it on me. What do we got?
So, scenario number one, and, this one's probably the easiest to imagine. The status quo just continues. Nothing really changes. Taiwan keeps doing its thing, keeps being a democracy, but without, that official recognition from the rest of the world.
So basically, more of the same, right? Like walking that tightrope. Yeah. But wouldn't that also mean that threat from China, it just keeps, hanging over them?
Oh, yeah, that threat wouldn't just go away. In fact, the CCP might even get more aggressive, trying to isolate Taiwan economically, diplomatically, maybe even with military stuff. It's all about pressure, right? Wearing them down.
Sounds exhausting, to be honest. How long can that go on for? Is there any scenario where things, get a little bit better?
Well, there's always hope, right? Another scenario is maybe the whole global balance of power shifts. Maybe the U.S. or some other big players decide to, really get behind Taiwan.
So like Taiwan finally gets some backup, but wouldn't that make China even more upset?
Oh, there's definitely that risk. I mean, if other countries start supporting Taiwan more openly, especially when it comes to security or, challenging that one China idea, that's going to escalate things with the CCP.
Yeah.
They see Taiwan as this core interest, right? So, it could increase the risk of conflict.
So it's no matter what, there's this risk, this danger. It's tough, for the international community wanting to support Taiwan, but also not wanting to start a huge fight with China.
Yeah, there are no easy answers, but there's one more scenario we haven't talked about. This one's about, changes within China itself.
Wait, hold on. Are we talking about a whole regime change?
Yeah.
The CCP suddenly loves democracy. What's going on here?
Hello, slow down. It's not that crazy. But it's possible that things in China change, right? Maybe they become more democratic, or maybe their leadership changes and their views on Taiwan change too.
Okay, I admit that's a long shot. But hey, anything's possible, right? Politics can be weird. But let's say that happens. What would it mean for Taiwan?
Well, it would definitely make things a lot easier for them. They'd have more freedom to, do their own thing. But even then, there'd still be challenges. You can't just erase decades of mistrust.
So it sounds like there's no easy answer no matter what. The future for Taiwan it's kind of up in the air. It must be tough, for people living there. All this uncertainty.
It is. And I think that's really important to remember. This isn't just some, political game. It's about people, right? Their lives, their hopes, and the people of Taiwan, they've been through a lot. but they're still fighting for their democracy, for their future.
Absolutely. That's a great point to end on, I think. We've covered some tough stuff today, but we've also seen how resilient people can be, how committed they are to their freedom. It's something we should all, pay attention to.
I agree. And as we wrap up, I hope everyone listening will go and learn more about this, explore different viewpoints, have conversations. What happens to Taiwan, it matters. And what we do now, it'll make a difference.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. And hey, if all this has got you feeling a little, stressed, I suggest heading over to the Mickytolife YouTube channel. They've got travel videos, whiskey stuff, unboxing videos. It's a good way to unwind after a deep dive like this.
Sounds perfect. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll be back soon with more deep dives, more interesting topics. Until then, stay curious.